RT with me, Andrew Farmer. Now, weeks after Edward Snowden's revelations of the United States mass snooping operation against infuriated EU citizens, Germany is taking steps to address threats to privacy. It wants to update UN data protection regulations, with some top officials also calling for a suspension of the data exchange treaty between Washington and the EU. Skeptics, though, suspect it's little more than general election campaigning, as Peter Oliver now reports from Berlin.
So two of Germany's most senior cabinet members have written to their EU counterparts to try and get them to push the United Nations to change their current privacy legislation. That all seems well and good, especially when you consider that the current privacy legislation was written way back in 1966, long before things like mobile phones, Facebook, the internet, all of those things that the NSA have been apparently looking into. Now, this could be a genuine effort by the German ministers to try and help the privacy of the people of the European Union, or it could be something of a smokescreen and a bit of damage limitation. Now, you have to consider that Germany was one of the major helpers for the National Security Agency when they were spying on people around the world. In fact, the BND, the German Secret Service, operated one of the major parts of PRISM. Now, this was called the X-Key Score program. That basically looked into what people were searching for online. And 500 million data connections here in Germany were checked, or were available to be checked, by the NSA. Now, this all comes after a week in which we've seen Angela Merkel originally claim that she only heard about NSA spying through the media. It then turned out that, in fact, Germany was one of these major partners. Now, the Germans have an election coming up, a big general election coming up here at the end of September, and the German people are understandably upset by the amount of information of theirs that was being looked at. Whether Edward Snowden knew that he could be a big influence in the German elections when he decided to leak these things, we'll never know. But what's for certain is he definitely, and the information he's brought forward will definitely be used in the upcoming weeks and months before that vote. Well, considering the involvement of Germany and other EU countries in the NSA spying program, it begs the question whether this is a legitimate attempt to improve the privacy of the citizens of the EU, or just politicians attempting to cover up the fact that they've been caught with their hand in the cookie jar.
Well, live now to the German capital, and Dr. Alexander Dix, the Berlin Commissioner for Data Protection and Freedom of Information. Thank you very much for coming on to RT today. What do you make of Germany's data protection drive? Do you think this is an aim to win votes, or do they have a genuine concern for privacy?
I think this issue is much more than a mere election issue. It is something very substantial at stake right now. As our federal president has pointed out, under the German law and the German constitution, there is a fundamental right of informational self-determination, or privacy as you might call it. And data protection commissioners all over the world have for a long time called for an international treaty to have privacy regulations in place to protect individual privacy and data when surfing the internet and crossing borders. And now the NSA scandal is just the last tip into this problem, to make it completely clear that we urgently need an international agreement in this sphere.
You say that, but do you feel as though these measures have only been put in place now, or this reaction has only happened because of Snowden's revelations?
Well, the revelations Mr. Snowden has made removed the last doubt. We had some suspicions that such a scheme was in place, but not the mere extent of this regular and unwarranted and disproportionate measures that are taken place by foreign intelligence services. And we definitely need limits and effective and transparent controls for intelligence services throughout the world, not only the United States.
So do you believe that, I mean, the actual treaty now that exists between the US and the EU, the Data Exchange Treaty, that's been called into question. Do you think that we're going too far, or you're going too far into calling that into question, or is that something that needs addressing too?
Well, you are referring to the so-called Safe Harbor Agreement. This covers private companies and big players, internet companies such as Google, Microsoft and Facebook and Amazon and others which have self-certified themselves as complying with European data protection rules. This is now to be called into question because even the European Commission has made it clear that national data protection authorities have the right and indeed the duty to stop data transfers if they have severe doubts that these principles are still being followed. This may not be the fault of Google and Facebook, but if Google and Facebook are actually completely open and their data flows are sidetracked and accessed without reasonable control by the NSA, we have a severe problem, and German and indeed European data protection authorities have to take measures now.
What are the chances of that actually happening, though? Because you're talking about big players, big corporations with a lot of lobbying power too. So do you think there is a realistic chance of altering that treaty? Well, that is up certainly to the European Commission. They have concluded this treaty, and they are now in the process of monitoring and evaluating that. Members of the European Commission have voiced severe doubts that that treaty can stay as it is at the moment, but that will be decided, I think, at the end of this year. But European and German data protection authorities have to take action now, and they have to deal with applications for authorizations to transfer data across the Atlantic, and these applications at the moment will not be granted as long as these questions have not been plausibly answered. Snowden's revelations indicated that the German intelligence services, as well as the NSA, were actually key partners. Isn't there a fear that it appears these agencies are working, they are a law unto themselves in effect? They are very hard to regulate simply because they are so secretive.
Well, I agree with you that there is a fundamental dilemma there, obviously, between protection of fundamental rights and privacy and the secrecy, which is to a certain extent necessary. But what we are seeing here is really excessive secrecy protecting excessive surveillance. And that cannot go on as it has done in the past. We need effective control, and we need limits to what the intelligence services are allowed to do.
OK, well, thank you very much for coming on to RT and giving us your opinion. That's Dr. Alexander Dix, Berlin Commissioner for Data Protection and Freedom of Information. Thank you. Well, the man who exposed the scope of the NSA surveillance to the world is still waiting for the paperwork to allow him to leave a Moscow airport transit.